Hello, everyone, and welcome to Motivational Moments with Tracy D. Armstrong. And today, for What's Your Mess, we have Miss Dominique Gilford. Say hello to everyone.
Hello, everyone, and thanks again for having me.
Thank you for being a part of this motivational moment time. Could you tell everybody just a little bit about yourself?
Yes, okay. My name is Dominique Gilford. I am originally from Orange, Texas. Moved here to Houston when I was 9, and I live in Houston, Humble actually. And I'm an entrepreneur. I've been an entrepreneur since I was about 25 years old, and I love it. That's a little bit about me.
Okay. That's awesome. You say you are an entrepreneur and you've been an entrepreneur since you've been 25. I'm not going to ask you to tell everybody how old you are because you don't look, I know how old you are. I know you don't look your age. So
Thank
we
you, thank you, thank you.
keep that on the hush, okay? Uh, but I know that you haven't always been an entrepreneur and you haven't always been at the level of living that you are right now. So
Yes.
could you tell everyone a little bit about your mess and some of the things or story that you may have gone through?
Yes, it's a lot of mess. Let me start there. And I think that the title you have is so befitting because there's so many people who have messes, and people usually pay attention to you after your mess is a little bit cleaner, and then they really don't know the backstory. So before I became an entrepreneur, I worked in the school district. I worked in a non-forest school district. And I had the ability and the privilege of working with children, and I didn't realize how much I enjoyed working with children until I actually landed in that industry. And one day I got fired on a Wednesday, just a random Wednesday. I was terminated. And I knew I didn't want to go back into something that I didn't control. And a big part of that was me understanding that in the Brown community, a lot of what you do in adolescence building up is give up control and listen to those that's around you, and whether it's positive or negative or however you take it on, that's the role that you play. And so being 25 and understanding I was a mother of a 3-year-old, a single mother of a 3-year-old at that time, and just understanding that when you feel like you are at your lowest point, you have nothing to lose. And so if I'm going to bet on something, I'm going to bet on myself. And that was just at that point, the mind frame that I took. Now, let me say this. Had I known the road was as tough as what it was, I probably wouldn't have tried it. But at the point, you just see people who are successful and you assume that the road to get there isn't as tedious as what it is. And once you're in the thick of it, you just have to keep going. There's no way to turn around from, what you're doing. And so for me, that's what it was. And I just thank God that there was a community around me that encouraged me to keep going, even when it was uncomfortable to keep going. And so at 25, I started at home daycare center. Then I was licensed for 12 kids and loved what I did. Love children. I mean, they don't have any limits. And so a lot of the dreaming and a lot of the possibilities that I created was based on me dealing with children who didn't know a limit. They'll jump off a couch, they'll jump off a countertop in a second. And it's like, wow, you're so fearless, and that has to come from somewhere. And that's from someone not telling you no, that's from someone allowing you to explore your environment. And so in hindsight, I think they taught me a lesson because I started to really explore my environment. And from there, I transitioned over into a commercial space where we were licensed for 45 kids. And then we opened up our second center. And then we were licensed for, I think, 62 kids. In our third center, we were licensed for 198 kids. And so we just slowly progressed and slowly began to grow. And then Harvey happened, and it took everything I had in my personal life, like everything that we physically owned that was a tangible aspect, we lost. And we lived in a hotel for 6 months. And a lot of people didn't know because we just thick through it, and then the pandemic came and it shut my business down, not by way of any choice, but me and my husband's choice. But we rebuilt and we had to pivot. And that's what life taught us in our mess. Learn how to pivot. If you learn how to pivot, you can always restructure, you can always rebuild, you can always grow. And so just find you a system and find you a community of people who don't mind pivoting with you.
Wow. And I'm saying wow because just in that short a moment of time, you've actually just said a lot.
Mhm.
Okay. So I'm going to back up.
Okay.
I'm going to back up to the point when you got fired.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm gonna go back to there because there's a lot in what you just said.
Yeah.
Go back to the firing on a Wednesday in the middle, and you said teaching. Okay,
Yeah.
could you tell everyone how was that mentally?
You know what? It was one of those moments, and this is how I saw it. The funny part was before I got terminated, I had already wrote out a resignation letter and I had it on my desk. I was so scared to turn in that resignation letter because I didn't know what people would have thought about me. And it was someone else's projection of what they would have felt about me that stunted me from turning it in. And the fact that she fired me, I took it as if that was God's way of pushing me and said, you have no other way to go, but this is it. What are you
That's
gonna
it.
do? Oh,
That's it. That's it. Okay. Wow. So you had already planned on resigning
mhm.
and they terminated you
Terminated me. Uh-huh.
before you could resign.
Yes.
Okay. So then after that happened, I
Mhm.
know that was mentally, that was it, but you looked at it, you took it and you looked at it from a positive perspective.
Yeah.
What did you do in order to start the child care centers and the motion that had to go behind that? Because you didn't go back to teaching, you transitioned it to your own, being able to control your own.
When I say at that point, I had already had everything in place. I had already did my licensing inspections. I had already did my LLC. I had already done everything. The last thing to do was quit. And so I couldn't, for whatever reason, I couldn't pull that trigger. I just couldn't pull the trigger. And that day, somebody pulled it for me. And they terminated me on a Wednesday. I had my first daycare kid on Friday. It was 2 days later. And so first daycare kid name was Laura. I literally went to go drop flyers off at the apartment complex off of Federal. And her mom was one of the receptionists that worked inside of the space. And she said, oh, it's a daycare. I'm looking for a daycare. Her daughter was my first kid.
So, okay, okay. So things just started to line up for
Mhm.
you once you were terminated, but you kept the mindset that it was working out for your good.
Yeah.
And then things started happening to where if you were terminated on Wednesday, you had your first child care, your first child on that Friday. That's just like, okay, it's just flowing.
Confirmation. Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
It's
So
confirmation.
you mentioned Harvey. I'm gonna hop now.
Okay.
Like I said, so you mentioned Harvey. For those that do not know, Harvey was a hurricane that happened in Houston in 2017.
17. Mm-hmm.
So, could you tell us how Harvey mentally and emotionally, what effect did that have? How did that hurt?
There's a certain level of fear that come over you as a mother when you have to transition in such a way to where you understand everything your child or your family knew before that point has to shift. And people always say, I feel like I failed, but it wasn't that I felt like I failed. It was, I felt like God was, I, because I know me, I'm the type of person, I get comfortable in habit. I will not change a habit because I'm comfortable. And every transition I've ever had that was pivotal came from something uncomfortable. And so I always choose to say, okay, God, this is something else. Like you giving me something else. Like I'm not ready for it, but clearly you think I'm ready for it because you keep giving them to me. And that was my mind frame. And so I remember going to my mother-in-law's house. We was going to spend the night there because they don't get rain on that side like that. And so we went and we woke up the next morning and my husband had gotten a call from a neighbor who was on the second floor. And he said, hey guys, everything that you guys have is gone. Like he woke us out of our sleep. We lost 4 vehicles. We lost everything in our home, every baby book, every baby picture, every piece of furniture, everything we owned was gone. And so we had to physically go back to the apartment to go walk it and assess damages for, FEMA and everything else. And I remember coming around the corner and the smell hit you when you came around the corner before you even opened the door. And it was like you had to literally work over mud and dirt on things that you once called possessions. It was like you took everything that was a defining point of who I was. And you told me to start over again. And so it's one of those moments where it's like, I don't even want to start over. It was like, let me go somewhere and sit down and focus, because clearly I'm not in the headspace to make a move, because if I make the wrong move, it's going to be hard to come back. And the only thing that we managed to save from Harvey was our business. That was the only thing still standing. And so having to mentally every day get up and still go to a daycare center and still deal with children and still deal with parents that experience loss, I don't think I stopped, and I don't think I stopped in process. And by the time I stopped in process, the situation was over. And so it was one of those things where you just push through. Honestly, I didn't have anything to give. I just gave what I could. And that seemed to have gotten us through, I guess.
Wow. I can imagine, because we were here in Houston too.
Mhm.
So let's talk about, you also mentioned, because you mentioned Harvard and then you mentioned the pandemic. So that's
Mhm.
why I say you that was a lot in one sitting,
There's
because
a lot.
I'm going back and touching on everything, because, and the reason I want to do that is because I know that there are people out there who've gone through loss of employment.
Mhm.
I know there's people who have gone through um, catastrophic situations, whether weather related or, natural disasters. And then I know the world has gone through the pandemic. So let's talk about that part in the mess,
Yes.
mental, emotional, and social status of how did that affect you? And pretty much how did you clean up in order to get to where you are now?
Okay. So the pandemic for me wasn't an issue while we were going through it, because it allowed me the first opportunity to sit down and not have to go. I really, this shut the world down, and everyone had to sit down and be with their thoughts. And it was the first time in a long time I had sat down and really processed anything. And for me, I took it as a safe haven, because you couldn't go anywhere. You had to sit with yourself. But once the world started to open back up and we could resume life as it was, for me, the childcare industry looked different. Real estate looked different. And so I remember really chewing over the idea of possibly closing our centers. And it wasn't because we were running out of our resources. It was because you have staff members that are scared. We had a staff of 18 that dwindled down to 7 during the pandemic. We had 198 kids when the pandemic started, and we had gotten down to 67 kids during the pandemic, and parents experience me having to bring my kids to daycare and then go off to work and then trust that you have them, and me come back and trust that they're going to be okay and that you did the best by them. And that was a lot of emotional toil on a lot of people. And at that point, I didn't see the benefit in staying open, understanding that our government and things that played a major part didn't have any answers for us. And so it's like exacerbating a condition, and it was exacerbated. And so my mental anguish in that point was, this is something I've been building for the last 14 years. And you're trying to tell me I now have to give it up because we don't know what we're doing. And I took it hard. I remember when I went and told my staff that we were closing, my daughter took off from school that day and she went with me. And she was the emotional support for me that day. I couldn't be a mom that day. And so with her being who she is, she literally stood there like with next to me the entire time. And she's like, Mom, you're good. If you need me to talk, I can talk. And I'm like, no, I got it. You need to hear from me. But that was the first moment where I saw, if you walk something and practice something long enough, those that watch you and study you will pick it up. And so that was the reassurance I needed in that moment, was her being there. And so we spent that 4 days just me emotionally processing, and I wasn't okay. I wasn't okay for like 2 or 3 months. And I mean, when I say she would have to cook and clean and emotionally do things that a child shouldn't have to do, but it was a pivotal moment for our life, and it was a big shift. And that was the biggest miss I had ever experienced, because I didn't know where to go with it. So that was a huge one. That one was huge.
And staying in that same space,
Mhm.
because you kind of just touched on it, how did that affect you socially, being in that space?
I think it's one of those things where socially you go back to the drawing board and you grind harder, you process more, you start out thinking quicker, you understand that it's you against time, and you have to process it. And for me, it was the first time you're faced with for me, it was a paralyzing fear, because it was, you spent 14 years building something for it to go back to ground zero and you have to start over. It was like, I don't even want to start over. Like, I don't care to start over. And it was so funny because everyone is around you is like, you got this. And it's like, I don't got it. You know, I have to be okay with saying I don't have it. And so when you mentally make up your mind that you're going to start over, it's an uphill battle. And so that's the battle, you know. And it literally was me crying every day. I'm not gonna lie, I cried every day because I didn't want to do it, but I had to do it. You know, it was no, I don't want to, is you got to. And so it was a lot of me processing what I needed to do for it to look different this time. And so it was a big mess. It was a really big mess.
Now let's talk about the status of life,
Uh-huh.
because you just said you built this 14 years of your life. Mentally, your mind is pretty
Mhm.
much all over the place. Emotionally, you're
Yeah.
going through. So
Your volume went out. I can't hear you. Uh-uh.
let's talk about your status of living and how did that change as you were going through these situations? Because you say you lost cars, you lost your home, you lost your business at one point. So your status of living had to have changed.
Mhm. Several times.
Okay.
Um, when Harvey, when my thank God, we lost everything but our business when Harvey hit. And so we managed to stay in a hotel for 6 months. And it didn't change in my pockets as far as what I was bringing in, but it was a point where everything I was bringing in had to help me rebuild my personal life on some level. And so my husband is in law enforcement, and his police chief, who is still his police chief, literally his family owns some acreage. I don't even know where they live. It's down by Mexico somewhere. So we literally got into a vehicle, drove down to Mexico, and his wife's family gave us everything that they had. When I say they had storage units of things like beds and couches and everything, and I mean, they blessed us with everything to furnish a home.
Wow.
And I had never seen anyone give on that level to somebody they did not know I have a personal attachment to. And so we didn't have to physically spend any money on furniture, beds, or anything like that, tables. We had all of that replenished. My daughter attends a school, and the principal called me, and he bought us a new washer, and he bought us a new dryer. He bought us a refrigerator. He gave us, I think, $6,000 in funds for us to live off of. When I say a community came together, a community came together, and I had never seen it done like that. And so it was just a testament again of God saying, okay, I took it, but here you go. And that's what it was. Then we progressed, and I said, okay, God, we lived in an apartment for 12 years. So I built my business. I said, okay, God, we need a home. I was getting married. My husband was like, I don't, all these people in one space. We are trying to recover. It's too much. And so Dr. Pam, I don't know if you were at church this Sunday, but Dr. Pam had a call in, and she said, if somebody was believing for a car, I think Sister Jada was the first person who went up to the front and stood at the front. And then Dr. Pam made a call in for people who were believing for houses. And she said, come up to the front. And she said, something is going to happen. There's going to be a testimony, and I need you to come back and give it. That Sunday, we went up to the front for a house. Literally 15 days later, we closed on a house. We had not looked for a house before then, but 15 days later, we closed on a house. And that's the house I live in now. Literally 15 days, I could show you the date we signed and the date we closed.
15, wait a minute.
15 days.
I got to call a timeout.
15 days.
15 days
15 days.
closed on a house, which takes
Closed on a house.
people.
And a down payment was given to us.
Girl, okay. I'll keep going. Keep going.
And so, and the down payment was small. It was like $20,000 with the down payment, but it was given to us. And so, and I said, okay, God, clearly this is you. Let's keep moving. My husband was scared. He was like, I don't know. We're going to stay. I said, we ain't staying nowhere. We going. And so we moved in here. And then it was so funny because 3 months later, it was the pandemic happened. And so we were in our home for the pandemic, and we spent all that time just putting things in place in home and structure and order. And then when the pandemic happened, I did a hard pivot into real estate because my family owns a brokerage, and they needed, and we were just doing. And during the pandemic, God told me to sow seeds. And it was seeds I ain't never sown before. Yeah, just different amounts. I said, God, I ain't got it to give now. You asking me to do something I ain't ready to do. But thank God for obedience, because I did what he told me to do and I didn't have it to do it. And so all that money that he had me to bless somebody with, I said, came back to me in double, literally in less than a year. And so he allowed me to sit with some people who taught me some industries. Because one thing about it is, if you own a business, you can make the money. It's one thing to make money. It's nothing to take the money and be able to make money in your sleep with that money.
Right.
And so I learned a skill and I learned a market of where I can make this kind of money. I can take money, I can put it in this market, and this market is going to make me money while I sleep. And it literally allowed for me not to have to work as hard. And so now I have a little bit more autonomy of my time, and I can make the decisions I want to make, not from a place of need, but from a place of because I want to. And that's a better feeling than having to do something just because.
That's an awesome feeling, especially like you said, making money in your sleep.
Yeah,
I'm sure all of us will want to make money in our sleep.
exactly.
So you were going down that road, and I'm just gonna keep on letting you flow down this road.
Okay.
For those that are out there listening to this, what could you suggest to them on how they can clean up their mess mentally, emotionally, socially, to have a better status of living? What are some things that you may have done that you can suggest to people so that they can get to the next level of living that they might be looking for?
The biggest thing is find out what makes you tick. One thing I know is people do jobs for the money. But if you find something you love, you will make money regardless. And that was something I did not understand, because I understand it takes money to live. I I am very thankful that I had a community around me that allowed me the autonomy of time to process that, and allowed for me to fall and allowed for me to stand up, because it was pivotal for my growth. But it took me facing fear. And that's something that we don't like to do, is face fear. And if you can ever get your mind under submission enough to address the real issues, you'll develop a skill, or you'll develop a craft around what you love and what you're passionate about. Um, I always tell people, there's a difference between some being a community and some being a neighborhood. A neighborhood is where you live and the people that are around you. A community are people who step up when there's nothing else to do but step up. When there's no financial or beneficial gain to them stepping up, they step up. And it isn't always blood. And I learned that the hardest way every time I fell. It was my neighbor who came and helped me clean up my apartment when Harvey happened. It was my husband's chief who helped us get furniture in our house when we had nothing. It was pandemic when I had my staff who stayed behind and understood we had to close down a building, 3 buildings, and they understand it was just the one to volunteer to do it. Those are pivotal things in a community that you get. And so you have to find your community, find people who encourage you. And sometimes your circle will look different. That don't mean the people you're used to sitting with, you can't sit with no more. That just means get to other tables and find out what other resources are at that other table. And don't be scared to ask a question, because if you're scared to ask a question, you're scared for the answer. And you can't be scared for the answer if you say you want to grow. And I think that was my biggest lesson, was getting out of my own way. Once I figured out how to get out of my own way and actually understood there was people who wanted to help you, it wasn't hard anymore. Why? Because I wasn't dependent on myself to do it. I was dependent on people who did not mind doing it. And that makes the difference. I promise you, it makes the difference. And if you don't know, I promise you, you'll be surprised how many people you can call in your circle and they'll give you the answer to a question if you just ask. And if we're like, oh, it's me against the world, it's not you against the world, it's you versus you. And if you get out of your own way, I promise you, you'll get there. But you just got to put in the time, and you got to put in the work, and you got to spend that time working on you. And so that's what I would tell anybody, because that was what saved me, honestly, was me figuring out I was the issue. It wasn't everybody else.
Wow. That right there. Let me go back. Let me, just in case y'all didn't hear. She said the last thing, I'm gonna go backwards. You
Okay.
had to get out of your own way.
Mhm.
You had to realize that you couldn't be fearful you had to ask people and let people know that you were in need of some things. And then one thing I just want to go back to is you said your circle may look different.
Mhm.
And it doesn't mean you can't be around that circle. It just means you may have to go to another table where they may have some other resources to help you get to where you need to be.
Mhm.
That right there, to me, that's the whole social part. A
Yeah.
lot of times people have to change and adjust who they socialize with sometimes in order to clean up their messes.
Mhm. And
So,
that
okay.
was during the pandemic. That's what happened. I had an opportunity to go to a conference in Atlanta. And I promise you, as clear as I'm talking to you, God said, just get in a room. He told me that multiple times. It was the weekend of my husband's birthday. My husband was turning 40 on that birthday. And my father-in-law was fighting for his life. He was on a ventilator. And when I say he was fighting for his life, and my husband and my father-in-law share the same birthday. And so the conference was the day of my husband's birthday and the day after. And I said, babe, all I know is God told me to get in the room. I know it's your birthday, and I know your dad is fighting for his life on life support. I know that, but I know what God told me to do. And my husband said, if that's what God told you to do, you need to do what God told you to do. And I got up, I packed the bag, I caught a flight to Atlanta, got to Atlanta, and got in the room. I was sitting down on the couch, and a CFO of a Fortune 500 company came and sat down next to me. To this day, me and the CFO of that Fortune 500 companies are like sisters. We talk every single day, literally. My other really, really good friend that I met there, she's an attorney. She's been an attorney for the last 35 years. I started a business that was a government institute. She did all of my legal. She did all of my paperwork for my profit and my losses, and then asked for a penny in return. And when I say we talk regular, we talk regularly. I created a board and I created a new company. When I say my daycare did a pivot, and that's what it's doing now, is a pivot. And so those are two people. And I said, let me pay you. She said, I wish I would take your money. And she told me, she said, I wasn't going to come, but God told me to go. She said, I don't think I was supposed to be anybody else in that room but you. And for somebody to tell you that, it sent shocks. I mean, it just shut me down, because what you mean, little old me, not little old me though, coming from where you come from, you grew up as a 1%er. That's your life. And so, it forced you to have to see life differently. It forced you to have to grow, but that's you sitting and understanding that not everybody that's going to go to the top with you is with you right now. And you have to be okay with that.
Facts.
So,
Facts. So everybody that you're with right now is not going to necessarily go to the top with you.
mhm.
Wow, Miss Dominique, I'm say well before we wrap up, tell everyone first. Let me thank you. Let me rewind. Let me thank you. This was awesome. This was amazing. I appreciate you. I appreciate your time. But tell everybody, what do you do now? If someone, I know you do multiple things and you have multiple streams of income. What can people do if they want to support you in what you're doing now?
Okay, well, I again, I do real estate full time. I do residential and commercial real estate. And basically what that entails is we are selling homes at a 40% in the minority community. We are selling property. We own 40% of real estate holdings as a community. It's the same percentage that we were buying property in the 70s and in the 60s. We have not grown. And one thing I love to do is I love to teach. That's why I went into education. So I said, God, give me something to where I can still teach and still do what I love to do. And so real estate, he merged that along with education, and I put it together, and that's what I built. And so that is my project. And when I tell you, I have people who come from every walk of life and they say, I can't do it. Let me tell you why I can't do it. And I listen to your reasons why. And I'm gonna tell you why you can do it. It's a process, and we usually get it done within 60 days. So I love a challenge. I love somebody telling me why they can't do something, because then I feel like I gotta fix it. I gotta, and so that's it. And so I took that, and then I had a really good friend named Dorita. She was like, well, you do real estate, you do it so well. She said, but you do business, and business is who you are, Dominique. That's what you do. And she was like, how about you take that and you put it together and you build it like this? And I was like, ugh. And so that's what I did. And so now recently, one of the pivots that I made was people who have businesses. but don't have them incorporated right, or don't have the structure set up right. I help them build them and put them on paper correctly so they can use that to leverage it to buy property and then build in the equity so that equity can build you to the next level. Because once you have equity, the game changes. The first step is getting the equity. And so
Right.
that's what I do now on top of helping people who want to start daycare centers and everybody don't know what to do. And what we do is we partner with them and we give them a year-long course on building it out and doing it and then taking money and invest it in the stock market, and you take the money out the stock market, don't pay taxes on it, and you set your children up for life. And so that's a lot of what I do now. It's just helping people structure to get to the next level, because I had somebody do it for me during the pandemic. And I could not do it for somebody else who needs it right now, coming out of a pandemic.
Is there a website that they can find you at?
So my website is www.dominique, that's DOMINIQUE, Gilford, GILFORD.net. It'll bring you to my page and you'll see all three services on there. Click the link of which one you're interested in, put it on my calendar. We jump on a 30-minute call and we strategize for that full 30 minutes.
That's what I'm talking about.
Mhm,
Giving back to those who are in need because someone gave to you.
mhm, mhm.
I just want to say again, I know I've said thank you. I'm say thank you again and again, again. And those of you who are in need of any of those services, make sure you check her out because I'm sure she can help you get to the level that you're needing to get to. So,
Yes.
any last words or any last thoughts before we wrap up this episode?
Yes. Thank you for asking me to speak. I hate speaking. I hate speaking and I hate speaking. But Tracy is one of those people that was a part of my village with my daughter. And when I say my daughter loves Coach Tracy, she loves Coach Tracy. Like, I swear to God, she loves Coach Tracy. And I mean, she exposed her to a different type of world with cheer and different relationships and different sisterhoods that was so pivotal in her developing the skills and the qualities she has. So I support you in all you do. I thank you for all you do. And I take my hat off to you because I know you wear many of hats, and I don't think people always acknowledge all the hats that you wear, but I mean, you do a lot. And so just thank you for sowing those seeds, and just thank you for being a voice for people who need a voice. Because I think that is very necessary in this time that we're living in. And I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to speak.
You are very, very welcome. So, everyone, again, this is the way I like to end every episode, okay? If you want to be sad, live in the past. If you want to be anxious and worried, think about the future. If you want to be happy, live in the present now and be grateful for what you have, okay? So that's your motivational moment with Tracy D. Armstrong. Thank you. And check us out. Don't forget to like and subscribe the page. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.